Oh, yeah, second. Okay, told everyone. This week's Parsha of Kitei contains 74 mitzvot, the largest number of mitzvot of any Parsha in the Torah. We all know that the mitzvot are divided into two categories. One is a mitzvah aseh, and the other is a mitzvah lo ta'aseh. The mitzvah aseh is, so to speak, a positive commandment. Do something. Give charity. Put on film. Take the lulav and esrog. Hear the shofar. The mitzvah lo ta'aseh is to refrain from doing something. Now, there are 248 mitzvot aseh and 365 mitzvot lo ta'aseh. There's a difference of opinion in rabbinic literature as to which of the statements in the Torah should be considered a mitzvah. There's 613 commandments that they all agree to, 248 plus 365. But exactly what the 613 are, there are differences of opinion. Nevertheless, it's clear that there are more mitzvahs lo ta'aseh than mitzvahs that are mitzvahs aseh. There are more commandments as to what not to do than what to do. And this, the Meforshim explain, is an attitude of the Torah. The Torah's attitude is drive defensively. Don't get into problems. Many times, and it's a matter that's true in society generally, in our rush to do good, we do harm. The Hippocratic oath that the medical doctors take, the first thing is not to do harm. Because the nature of people is that it's very easy to do harm. Almost subconsciously, we can do harm without even realizing it. And therefore, the Torah establishes for us defensive measures. If you follow the 365 lo ta'aseh to a great extent, you will be saved from doing things that are wrong. So, for instance, I mentioned last night I was at a Sheva Brochus. So the Torah says in this week's Parsha, Ki tivneh bayit chadash, when you are going to build a new home, V'asito ma'ake legagecha. Make a fence on the roof. If the roof is a flat roof, and people will go up there and use it. If there is no fence, God forbid someone can fall off the roof. So that when you come to build a new home, the first mitzvah that's involved is to build a makeh, to build this fence. So the Nitziv mentions in his parish, the Hamig Dover, that why didn't the Torah say, Kitivne bayit chadash, if you're going to build a new home, vasito mezuzah l'daltecha, put up a mezuzah to your door. Now, we all know that mezuzah is a very popular mitzvah. Surveys have shown that vast majority, 80–85% of all people living in Israel put up a mezuzah on their door, because the mezuzah is the symbol of safeguard, etc. Whatever you want to do, people like mezuzah. So why didn't the Torah tell us to put up a mezuzah? Why did the Torah tell us a strange Allah to build a fence? So the Nitziv in his parish gives a technical answer that in the exile, if you build a home in the exile, so for the first 30 days, there's no obligation to put on a mezuzah, because that's a symbol that anything we build in the exile does not have permanence. It's not eternal. If you build a home in Eretz Yisrael, so then that's permanent. And therefore, you're obligated to put a mezuzah on immediately. But a makeh, a fence, that everybody has to put on immediately. That's the explanation of the Nitziv. But in a general sense, we can say that the Torah here is teaching us this lesson. You want to build a home that'll be lasting, that won't have casualties, so to speak. Nobody will fall off the roof. So the first thing to do is build a fence. You'll say, well, who's going to fall off my roof? The Torah says you have to be aware that in life everything happens, and that it's the unexpected that is expected. That's what occurs. And therefore, one has to always factor that into one's behavior. And that the mitzvahs losas are here to mitigate our arrogance, that we think we know what's going to happen, that nothing is going to happen to me. I'm not vulnerable. The Torah doesn't make exceptions. So in this week's Parsha, we have a Parsha called Ben Sorer Umoreh, a rebellious child. not only a rebellious child, but a child that is a complete danger to society, to his family, to society. And this raises a great moral question, because this is the only case in the Torah that a person is going to be punished, not for what one did, but for what one is going to do. Nerag al pi sofo. So the great moral question is, the doctor that delivered Hitler, or Chairman Mao, or Stalin, if he would have choked the child at birth, would have saved maybe tens of millions of people. But he would have been a murderer. So that's an enormous moral question. Because of that, there's an opinion in the Talmud that this case of Ben Sora Amora is not an actual case. Lo hoya v'lo nivra. There never was such a case. In effect, because we don't know how things are going to turn out. So it's very hard to say that you're going to execute somebody because of what he's going to do. How do you know what he's going to do? We only know that in hindsight. So therefore, that's the case of La Hoya V'lo Nivra. Never was such a case. It's a theoretical case. Why did the Torah write it? Rosh v'kabel schar. That we should learn the case and learn a moral lesson from it. What's the moral lesson? There are two other cases that the Talmud tells us that also fall into this category of Lo Hoya V'lo Nivra. One is Nigei Botim. We know that there, just as there were plagues that infested people, so we have the dinim of tzoras, etc. So too, there are plagues that infest a house, a dwelling. And the Mishnah and Gemara establish for us certain criteria regarding such a case. And the criteria are so exact that there's an opinion in the Talmud that it could never happen. The infestation has to happen only in the corner. It has to be equidistant on both walls. It's something that can't happen. So again, it's Lo Hoya V'lo Nivra. But the Torah tells us such a case, even though it's not actual. There's a third case that's mentioned in the Talmud that also falls under this rubric of Lo Hoya V'lo Nivra, a case that never can occur. And that's the case of Ir Hamidachas. We read it recently in the Torah, that in a city in Israel, the entire city is seduced to worship pagan gods. So then the city is destroyed, and all of the property of the city has to be destroyed. So the Talmud says that can never happen, because it says there is no city that has Jews in it that does not have a mezuzah, and the mezuzah contains the name of God, so to speak, and you can't destroy that. So therefore, this also is a theoretical case. It's not a case that can actually exist. So we have here three cases, three sets of circumstances where the Torah has given us a mitzvah, has told us what to do, but that there's no actuality in it. That's one opinion in the Talmud. There's a second opinion that all of these cases are actual. And the man in the one who made the statement that the Talmud says, what are you talking about? I saw the grave of the Ben Sorah Moreh. I saw the tell of the city that was destroyed. I saw the ruins of the house that was infested. All of these things are real. So the question arises when you have this type of disagreement in the Talmud, what are they arguing about? One says that it never happened, and the other says, what do you mean it never happened? I saw it. So there's a famous idea that we are taught that the Talmud never disagrees in the actuality of the matter. The disagreement or the difference of opinion is in what is the moral lesson. They don't dispute the actuality of matters. And there are many opinions that this fits into. So what happens here? You have here, one of the rabbis said it never happened. The other one says, not only it happened, I'm witness to it. So there's a famous idea of the Khatam Sofer regarding this matter. And it's a matter of drush. In other words, it's not a simple explanation, but it is the moral lesson that we are looking for. And he states that if a person says that Ben Sorah or Moreh can never happen, meaning he says, my family is immune. I cannot be affected by it. My family never will resort to these types of behavior. So then, that's when it happens. That's when the actuality switches in. Because then it's clear that there are no defensive measures. People that raise children on the basis that nothing can go wrong are doomed. Everything can go wrong. And therefore, one has to be very fortunate, but one has to be very serious in the education and raising of the next generation. Because you cannot say, well, it's not going to happen to me. My child is not going to be a thief. My child is not going to be a murderer. You have to drive defensively. And the same thing is true regarding a city. The society that says, you know, well, we're in a perfect society. We're never going to have troubles. So it doesn't take defensive measures. It doesn't take defensive measures, then you have chaos. It's part of the problem that especially is ravaging the United States today. So many cities that are unsafe for you to live in, to walk in, to exist in, because the prevailing view of the government is that if you're nice, nothing's going to happen. So you don't need police, and you don't need prosecution, and you don't need jails, and you don't need punishments. What's going to happen? Everybody's going to be good. And that is a sure recipe for chaos. It's a sure recipe for crime. And the same thing is true in one's home. It says, my house is, nothing can happen. Well, your house can be plagued too. So the Torah wants us to drive defensively. It wants us to realize that everything can happen and to try and take measures against it. And the end of this week's Parsha is the famous Parsha of Amalek. The Jewish people are commanded to remember Amalek. Not only the Torah emphasizes it, not only in a positive way, zochor, to remember, but even in a negative way, lo tishkach, don't forget. Because sometimes telling somebody to remember is not enough. But if you tell them don't forget, so then it has a greater gravitas, it, so to speak, makes a bigger impression. Now, who in the world remembers Amalek except us? If the Torah wanted that Amalek should be forgotten, then it would tell you, ignore it, forget it. Let's rip those pages out of history. And let's, advance, go beyond it. Don't forget. Yet the Torah commands us always to remember. I have to remember what Amalek did 3,000 years ago. Because the Torah wants us to remember what kind of world we live in. How dangerous our world is. It's a world where Amalek, in all of its forms, is always present. So don't forget that. And therefore, take whatever proper steps you can to try and protect yourself. Try and make sure that Amalek doesn't reach you. And that's an enormous lesson. We would like to say that we're past that, but the world keeps on showing us that we're not. Yitzchak Avinu and Rivka, our mother, come to live in the land of the Plishtim by Avimelech. So Avimelech is a wonderful host. Wherever you want to live, live. You want to make money, whatever you do, fine, good. But in the land of Avimelech, they stop up the wells that Avraham Avinu made. And in the land of Avimelech, Rivka herself is taken as a hostage. And when Yitzchak confronts Avimelech about all of these items, we're going to read part of it in the laning of Rosh Hashanah. So Yitzchak says only one thing. You got everything here, but there's no fear of God. There's no fear of God. All the laws in the world won't help you. No one knows whether you steal or not. But God knows. So if you want to be sure that you're not going to steal, you have to deal with God. The IRS won't catch you. And it's true of every lav in the Torah. And that's why there's so many lavim. Because they are all, you're not doing anything. No one can catch you. But you're dealing with godly matters. You're dealing with eternal matters. So I want you to be careful, to drive carefully. You know, one of the great moral lessons here in our time is speed cameras or police vehicles on the road. It's been proven over and over again that wherever there are speed cameras or there are police vehicles on the road, the rate of accidents declines and speed violations decline. How can I speed? Right next to me is the police car. And nobody wants to be pulled over. So therefore, obviously, that's what the problem is. So we have to always envision ourselves, you know, that the Shivisi Hashem lenegdi somid. God is interested in me. We feel that he's not interested, right? You got 7 billion people to look after, so what does he care about me? I can do whatever I want. But that's not the case. That's the basis for the fact that there are so many lavin in the Torah. Don't eat this. Why don't I eat this? Because God told them, I have a relationship with God. I don't need it. I don't say things. I don't do things. I don't look at things. That's all part of the Yoreisa Malakecha. You're afraid. But V'yoresa is more than being afraid. V'yoresa is like the word ro'o, to see. You should see that God is looking at you. And if that is the case, then you'll behave differently. So V'yoresa means look and see things. So that's why we have the 365 lavin in the Torah. It's to remind us always whom we're dealing with and what we're supposed to do. And therefore, the plethora of mitzvahs which exist in this week's Parsha, most of them are lavin, most of them are negative, because they are to make us aware of the relationship that we are bound to have with the Ribono Shel Olam. And therefore, we will always drive defensively throughout our lives and avoid situations that are always fraught with danger. We're always we're always in danger of falling off the roof, always in danger of doing something wrong. If we're careful, so then we can have not only this life, but eternal life as well. I have one story to conclude. I have a very fine woman that comes in once a week to clean the house. So when she comes in, I unlock the door. I open the front door and leave it open. So she once asked me, why did I do that? So I told her because, there's a din of yichud. There's a law that you're not allowed to be in a private room with a woman that's not your wife. So you have to have the door open or some means of access. So she said to me, but you're so old. So I didn't want to prove her wrong. But I explained to her that this is a rule for the Chafetz Chaim, not for me. It's a rule for everybody. Torah made no exceptions. There's no Shulchan Aruch for rabbis. It's all part of the same picture. That one has to always drive defensively. Always be aware of what the problems could be. And by so doing, so then the moral lesson is achieved and we understand what the Torah wants from us. So I want you all to have a great and good Shabbos. Next week, the same time, 10 o'clock, Kol Tuv Selah. Alvin, how are you? Great to see you.
Next week I'm going away for 6 weeks too, but that's I'm sure it'll be this is yours. I just did come back. What? Please come back. I didn't want to prove her wrong.